different types of abuse, right? As we know, there's financial abuse, which I see a lot in Desi and Arab cultures. There's emotional abuse, very common in my opinion, way more, happens way more than people realize, I think. A lot of relationships that have power dynamics, I think there's an emotional abuse element going on there.
What would be an example of emotional abuse?
Gaslighting is one of the common, it's a word that we're using more often now. Most people use it wrong I think, like I'm seeing a lot of people use the term and I'm like, that's not how to use it. The word actually means making someone think that they're crazy or making someone start questioning their own reality. And do you know where the word comes from? It's really interesting. There's a movie called Gaslight, it takes place in Chicago, back in a long time ago, whenever gas lamps were a thing, right? There was like a literal gas light. And the husband of a couple was dimming the gas light a little bit more every day. And the wife was like, it's getting darker, like the light is like less, right? And he was like, no, it's in your head. That's where the term gaslighting comes from. So that's the actual definition, is making someone question their own reality. But the person who is doing the gaslighting knows exactly what's going on. And so a lot of times when people say, and we see this in every level, we see it in government, we see it in politics, we see it in media, we see it, especially nowadays, we see it in domestic relationships, we see it in any abusive relationships, we see it in cults, in gangs, in a lot of, any system, large or small, with power dynamics. Sometimes we gaslight ourselves when we start questioning our own instinct, and that's a result of being gaslit sometimes. Sometimes it's a result of just like not trusting ourselves enough, things like that. But so an example of gaslighting would be like the light thing, like from the movie. But it would also be like when someone's like, oh, this didn't happen, it was in your head, And it's hard to say sometimes because memory can change. Like memory is so, and our memories can like be affected, but it is hard to say sometimes, but sometimes it's pretty obvious, especially when there's a system of abuse with other types of abuse also going on. Emotional abuse almost always is present when there's another type of abuse going on, financial, physical, verbal, things like that.
So you said financial, you said emotional, and now you also mentioned physical and verbal?
Yeah, and there's more. There's sexual abuse, obviously. And most often, there are more than one present at the same time. When someone says, oh, I'm not a victim of domestic violence because I haven't been physically abused, that's the first stereotype that I want everyone, misconception, stereotype, whatever you want to call it, that I want everyone to learn, is just like, that's not the only form of abuse, because so many relationships that I've seen have verbal, or sometimes they do have physical abuse, but the person doesn't qualify it as physical abuse because the victim is either in denial, understandably, or they see it as a one-time thing, or like, oh, it's only because of his anger problems or something, right? But when someone sees it as coupled with, the verbal or the emotional abuse, then they're more likely to kind of notice the severity of the situation and see how it's actually a domestic violence like pattern,
And when it comes to physical abuse, is there some sort of range of variability when it comes to what a victim might consider physical abuse? So for example, if maybe a victim of abuse doesn't view a slap as abuse, but they'll view a punch as abuse, and if their significant other slaps them but doesn't punch them, they may view that as, oh, I'm not being abused, I'm just being disciplined. And maybe that's because of the way they were brought up, that historically, when they weren't being obedient to their parents, they faced, that level of abuse that has been normalized and conditioned in their brain. And then when they're seeing that repeated pattern as a significant other, that form of abuse, it's still normalized to them. So is there a lot of reprogramming that goes on with these clients that maybe don't recognize that they are being abused?
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a range, and actually only after I started started practicing law in this field, I also learned that even throwing a table or a chair, or not a table, but throwing, over a table, or pushing, yeah, pushing a table or throwing a chair or like punching a wall, even though it's not to the significant other, it still counts as physical abuse because the aim is to threaten. It's to intimidate the other person.
Always escalate too.
Exactly. I always tell my friends or clients or whoever is dealing with any of this that when something is like at a level 2 or 3, it's going to escalate. Like it's just a natural progression of domestic violence. They slowly push boundaries, gain trust. It's not a haphazard thing. It's a very manipulative process. So people do start at level 1 and 2 and 3, which could be, I don't know, on one side of the spectrum, but it does increase. So I kind of tell a lot of my clients and or anyone I know who's going through this that like if it is at this level, unless there's intervention of some kind, which could be couples therapy, it could be individual therapy, it could be the person realizing what they're doing, it could be something about breaking the cycle because it's a cycle usually. Then unless there's that of some sort, it's gonna get worse probably.